easy one. Oh,
Is that cool with you
Walters.
guys?
Yeah.
So we are rolling now.
Jackson, what you up to this weekend?
So, I'm not sure, but it's finals weekend. I have to work on a whole bunch of stuff. And
Here we
it's
go.
making me a little nervous about everything that's to come.
You know
What about
they
you,
say?
Lucio?
Studying is doubting your own potential.
Studying is down your own potential. Welcome back to the Mr. Seeley Show. Today we're going to be doing a part on poems, specifically Mismatch Shoes by Yusuf Komunyakaa. Today I'm here with Zachary Tang and Lucio Hightower, and we are going to be talking about Mismatch Shoes. I'm first going to read it, and then we're going to interpret the poem. Mismatch Shoes. A tiger shark swims from the mother's stream, away from danger, or hunger to the unknown. Planet orbiting a dreamer's head. My grandfather came from Trinidad, smuggled like a sack of papayas, on a banana boat, to a preacher's bowl of gumbo and jambalaya, to jazz. The name Brown fitted him like trouble. A plantation's owner's breath clouded each filigree letter. He wore a boy's shoe and a girl's shoe, with the taste of mango on his lips. Gone was his true name, and deep song of Shango. But for years it was whispered, same as a poor man's might touch. A lover's satin glove from another life. The island swelled in his throat, and Calypso leapt into the air, only to be amputated by the wind's white blade. Yet he could coo big, country woman, and glide into improvised jitterbug that tripped hearts. All night, blackjack and moonshine in mill towns took him early. We had paid our death taxes, but my grandmother never stopped whispering his name. I picked up those mismatched shoes and slipped into his skin. Komunyakaa, his blues, African fruit on my tongue. So I'm going to open it up to Mr. Tang and Mr. Hightower. We're going to start with the beginning of this poem. Do either of you guys like to share?
In the beginning, Komunyakaa really opens up with like curious, like childlike, how a tiger shark swims away from the mother stream, leaving home, but it's like away from danger, which is like kind of ironic because home is associated with like safety, but it's like a childlike curiosity to expand beyond the home and to search for something like better, almost like how his grandfather is a dreamer who dreams to go from Trinidad to the U.S. And it really is like a childlike curiosity, kind of like. Okay.
Yeah. Also, in the first line, they call him the metaphor of tiger shark shows him as dangerous, even though he's just a kid. So it's interpreted as dangerous from the start, and they have a tiger shark swims away. It shows how people see him as dangerous because from where he's from in Trinidad, and the other people observe him as a threat.
Very cool. Yeah, I thought of it in a similar way. I thought it wasn't necessarily him running away from home, but it was more him leaving home for a better life and realizing that there's a better life out there, which takes us kind of to this next part, planet orbiting a dreamer's head, and the sentences to follow. What were your guys' thoughts on that bit there?
That seems to be a metaphor for the American dream. We have the dreamer's head and the unknown planet, which would be America. I'd assume that metaphor is talking about how he left Trinidad and is going to the United States, and he was smuggled that way in a search of away from danger, as it says earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's important to highlight the enjambment, how each line it cuts off at like a unpredictable. It creates like some type of like syncopation, and almost like adds to the mystery, the newness, and the newness of the new world.
Yeah, cool. I'm gonna cut this part out, but I think it's best we look at the camera when we're like saying the stuff. You know what I mean? But I don't know. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Let me clap so I can find it. My interpretation of this part was similar again. I thought the idea of smuggling in like a sack of papayas and then bringing up another fruit was kind of almost saying that he didn't have much value around him, his grandfather, and then he was able to make a new life. He was seen almost as insignificant, almost like fruit coming into the US. We don't really know where it's coming from, and it doesn't matter to us until it's there on our plate or we're eating it. And I think this is almost similar, like we don't care enough about the people that are coming into the US, and we just see them as this or that and kind of insignificant until they're helping us or part of the community. So I thought that was interesting. To the next part, bowl of gumbo or jambalaya to Jazz. The name Brown fitted him like trouble. Zach, did you want to say anything on that and the lines to follow?
I thought it was really interesting to contrast like these ideas, like these images of like South and African like foods to the plantation owner, which is a sign of oppression. It really juxtaposes the African culture to the clouding of the culture by the white imperialistic nations.
Lucio, any thoughts?
And then, yeah, I was thinking about how jazz fits him a lot, and it's showing a lot of the culture behind where he moved to and how he sort of left behind his culture from Trinidad to accept a new sort of African American culture in the South. And he moved to the plantation and was smuggled there. And it continues to talk about how his name was sort of Trouble,
Yeah.
and how he had a new name, which is Brown, not his old name from Trinidad, how he was sort of like dehumanized and taken his identity away for a new one when he moved and he was now in the U.S.
Yeah, it's like that shift of like relating back to his grandfather, the shift of his grandfather being smuggled over and in this new life, this new light, and then I guess similar to this again, like the name Brown fitted him like trouble. Yeah. All right. You want to share something else? You're good.
It's kind of like forced assimilation, where you're forced to assimilate to the culture, but also losing your own identity.
Yeah. And for the next part, and relating to the title again, he wore a boy's shoe and a girl's shoe with a taste of mango on his lips. Now, to me, these two ideas seem very different. Boy's shoe, girl's shoe, taste of mango on his lips. But I'm sure there's a connection. Did you guys find a connection there?
I thought it was talking about like the different identities he had to wear. He had to be a boy or like a masculine figure where he's standing up for himself, but also a feminine figure for himself, because he's kind of alone, so he has to take care of himself, his emotional needs as well. And then even like the mismatched shoes is like it's reminiscent of like poverty, but he has the sweet taste of mango on his lips, so he's kind of like
Reminds him of where he's from and that type of thing, yeah.
And like despite his conditions, he's living like with a sweet taste in his mouth.
And then
It's okay, we can cut out anything like this. I want to say one last thing about the shoes. I think it's interesting making the difference between boys' shoes and girls' shoes. Maybe in Trinidad, where he came from, or him referencing his grandfather, there wasn't such a big juxtaposition or difference between boys' shoes and girls' shoes. And it's interesting that he highlights it here so much. Versus just saying mismatched shoes like the title, he's making it very clear that it's a boy's shoe and a girl's shoe. Not even a man's shoe and a woman's shoe, it's a boy's shoe and a girl's shoe. So that's one way of looking at it. I think also it's saying like he doesn't have the opportunity to worry about the way he looks or the shoes that he has on. That's not the first thing in his mind. The first thing in his mind is, you know, unfortunately, maybe it's assimilating into the culture to be successful, as was mentioned earlier. But yeah, that's another one of my thoughts. For the next part, it kind of goes back to maybe where he's from. Gon was his true name. Do you guys want to speak on that and the next few lines there?
These lines kind of reminded me of like Song of Solomon, where you know how Milkman goes on his quest for his true name, and how in Song of Solomon we learned how important names are to one's identity and how powerful they are. Shango is the Yoruba god of thunder and justice, so he could be turning to him to like give justice to a situation. And I thought it was interesting how the god of thunder, like this deep song of Shango, was whispered. But he's the god of lightning. He should be praised. He should be like loud, but it is whispered.
Interesting. Suppressed.
Suppressed.
Yeah.
It also makes the metaphor in the next two lines where it says, "Same as a poor man might touch a lover's satin glove from another life." And that's sort of talking about how it's very rare. Like his connection back to his culture and heritage is quite rare, and almost it doesn't happen often. He's often forced us to assimilate and sort of forget that past to be successful.
Yeah. Thank you. The next lines: "The island swelled in his throat, and Calypso leapt into the air, only to be amputated by the wind's white blade." This is pretty powerful. Do you have anything to say, Mr. Tang?
I do. Calypso is, it's referencing two things. Calypso, the woman in Greek mythology who was banished to the island and hid Odysseus, but also it's Caribbean music, like on like steel tin drums, and it was used for a political expression for the French Creole.
Wow.
So it being leapt into the air was like a form of them expressing their complaints, but then it was amputated by the white wind's blade, which I interpreted as the white imperial colonizers.
Wow, some rich history behind that. Do you see any thoughts?
I agree with Mr. Tang. A lot of the imagery he uses, he says the wind's white blade. Could also be talking about the wind, the sails, the ships that took him from Trinidad,
Yeah, wow.
high ships back to the U.S. and sort of talk about that whole process. That was he was like smuggled in. He didn't have any space. He was very terrible conditions he was in, and sort of referencing that.
Yeah. I thought similar. I thought the island swelled in his throat was interesting because it talks about kind of everything he's gone through, and then the island swelled in his throat. It almost reminds me of like maybe him becoming emotional and him on the verge of crying or something like that, or choking up because of the idea of where he's come from and everything that's happened. And then again, like it's amputated and cut by the white man's blade. So like you were saying, like white people coming in and destroying things, or the sale of white ships and taking away him or his family, his ancestors, and I thought that was interesting.
The next line, he could coo big countrywomen and glide into an improvised jitterbug that tripped hearts. All night blackjack and moonshine in mill towns took him early. You guys think about that?
I think it was him kind of like adapting and assimilating in the South. It's kind of romanticizing this like hyper masculine, like like pulling women and doing like having alcohol and gambling.
Yeah.
But it's him like going into these like maybe like traditionally like it's like traditionally westernized, like I would say like
Capitalistic.
yeah, capitalistic,
Capitalistic.
like games or like culture and winning at it. So it's kind of like him going into another culture and doing well.
Yeah, a continued assimilation kind of into this Western culture that can be seen through, I guess, these Western ideal games that are glorified, like gambling, drinking, drinking moonshine specifically in mill towns. So maybe it was illegal to drink at that time, or he's thinking back to a time that was illegal, still representing his grandfather. Yeah. So we talked about that there. We had paid our death taxes, but my grandmother never stopped whispering his name. It's another powerful sentence. Do you guys have anything to say about that one?
I think it talks a lot about how they'd already mourned his death after he died, but his grandmother kept remembering him, and sort of kept that culture alive for Kumanyaka to eventually take it on and take it with him as well. So it never truly died with him.
Yeah.
I think it reminds us the power of names again, how his grandmother never stopped whispering his name. It's kind of remind me of like, well, obviously she kept his name alive for Kumanyaka, but she also kept like alive the culture. It like juxtaposes with like just like the ideas before, which was the capitalistic westernized like ideas, and then like Kumanyaka fades it back in with like the African roots with the whispering his name.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I thought of it almost like a continued assimilation. I see death, we had paid our death taxes. I see death in a capitalistic culture as more of like, that's it. That's done. Once you die, that's it. And people forget about you, and that's it. That's kind of a capitalistic way of looking at death. But in a more or like cultured setting or an environment where capitalism isn't as widely accepted that the grandmother might have still been in, she's still alive and she's still breathing, even though she might have died. The thought of her is still there, and her legacy kind of moves on because she maybe didn't assimilate into this culture. That's kind of what I interpret it talking about.
Yeah, I feel like capitalistic culture, it's like once you're no longer of economic value, then you're thrown away.
Yeah,
but then
exactly.
In African culture, it's like there is like
you're honored.
Belief,
yeah.
Belief about ancestors and all that stuff.
Yeah. All right, the last sentences. I picked up those mismatched shoes and slipped into his skin. Kumanyaka, his blues, African fruit on my tongue. You guys have anything to say about that?
I think it's talking about how after he died, his grandmother sort of kept his grandfather's name alive, and he eventually took that culture that he learned from his grandmother and then applied it to himself, his own work, his own poetry, and then kept his name alive, kept his family and his culture alive from Trinidad, and moved forward.
I thought his blues was really powerful. It was like, well, blues are the jazz, the song, which I thought of like interpreted as a culture, but also like blues as in like his burdens, like his the weight of being an immigrant in America and the struggles that come with that.
Yeah, I saw it similar. I mean, it ties back to the mismatched shoes, which is the title of the poem, and maybe talking about how the grandfather might not have known his place, which I feel like was expressed throughout this whole thing, this assimilation. And he's saying that he's putting himself in the mismatched shoes, and he can feel what the grandfather might have been feeling, his grandfather, Mr. Kumanyaka. And again, the blues, African fruit on my tongue, kind of going back to this heritage, this culture that was kind of clouded throughout the whole poem. So on that note, we're going to end with some jazz. Thank you very much.
Thank you for tuning into our show.
My show, actually. Keep that in. Cool. All right.
That was good. That's pretty good, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Got a lot to edit there, Jack.